Right now, as you are watching this, the European continent is in the middle of its second historic heat event in under 3 weeks. And I need you to stop what you're doing for just one moment. Because what I am about to show you is not a normal summer forecast. It is not the kind of weather update where I tell you to bring sunscreen or expect a warm week. Over 9,900 people are already dead across the continent. Belgium recorded 1,947 excess deaths in 2 weeks, with the mortality rate climbing to 48% above normal, the deadliest heat wave the country has seen in 30 years. Spain has confirmed more than 1,000 heat-related deaths since late June. Barcelona hit 40.5 degrees Celsius on July 8th, its hottest temperature since records began. A wildfire in southeastern Spain has already killed at least 12 people, with 23 more still missing. And the part that should stop you cold, that is not the news from the past. That is where things stand this morning. And the scientists watching this event are telling us clearly, plainly, and repeatedly that the worst of it is still ahead. If you have never watched a weather update before in your life, watch this one, because what is coming for most of Europe over the next several days is going to be more dangerous than anything that came before it. And I am going to walk you through exactly why the scientists are saying that and exactly what the data shows right now. Let me start with what actually happened, because to understand why scientists are so alarmed about what is coming, you need to understand just how extreme what already happened really was. In late May 2026, an early and completely unseasonal heat dome settled over Western Europe, producing the highest temperatures ever recorded for that month in multiple countries. France, Ireland, and the United Kingdom all broke records. Portugal hit 40 degrees Celsius. That was supposed to be the anomaly, the early warning. Then, starting around June 17th, just before the summer solstice, a second and far more dangerous heat dome developed, driven by what meteorologists call an omega block, a weather pattern named for the shape it forms in the upper atmosphere. An omega block traps high pressure between two areas of lower pressure on either side, so hot, dry air simply cannot move away. It sits in place, it compresses, it builds day after day with nowhere to go. That pattern locked in over the last 2 weeks of June and pushed temperatures across Portugal, Spain, and France into the low to mid 40s Celsius, with Andújar in southern Spain reaching 45.1 degrees Celsius, or 113 degrees Fahrenheit, on June 22nd, the single highest reading of the event. Pissos in southwestern France hit 44.3 degrees Celsius, the hottest day recorded there since France began keeping records in 1947. Germany set a new provisional national record of 41.7 degrees Celsius at Caution on the border with Poland, a mark that fell on 3 consecutive days, breaking the previous record from 2019. The Czech Republic recorded 41.9 degrees Celsius, its highest reading ever. The UK broke its hottest June day on record 3 days in a row. Hungary, Poland, Denmark, Switzerland, Belgium, Austria, Slovakia, Romania, and Belarus all broke national or monthly heat records during the same 2-week stretch. For the first time in recorded history, Belarus reported a temperature above 40 degrees Celsius. The scale of what happened to people during those 2 weeks is difficult to hold in your head all at once. So let me walk through it region by region using the actual numbers public health agencies have released. In Belgium, the Federal Agency for Health and the Research Institute, Cinsano, reported 1,247 excess deaths between June 18th and July 1st, with the excess mortality rate reaching 48% above the baseline that would normally be expected for that period. That makes it the deadliest heat wave Belgium has experienced in 3 decades, surpassing anything the country saw even during the catastrophic 2003 European heat wave that killed tens of thousands across the continent. In France, the National Public Health Agency reported roughly 1,000 excess deaths tied to the heat, the majority of them among people over the age of 65. At least 18 people died directly from heat-related causes in a single stretch in late June, including 2 young children found unconscious in a hot car in the town of Carpentras, and dozens of people drowned across the country as they sought relief in rivers, lakes, and the sea, with drowning deaths in France rising sharply compared to the previous year. Spain's Carlos III Health Institute reported at least 1,028 heat-related deaths during June alone, and Spain's National Meteorological Agency confirmed that June 22nd and 23rd were the 2 hottest days recorded in mainland Spain in any June since at least 1950. Across the entire continent, the World Health Organization's Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus confirmed more than 1,300 excess deaths within the first 10 days of the event alone, a number that early attribution and excess mortality estimates have since pushed above 9,900 as the toll from both the June and July phases of the event continues to be tallied. Now here is where the science becomes impossible to argue with, because this is not a case of a weather channel calling something unprecedented for dramatic effect. World Weather Attribution, a network of researchers from Sweden, Denmark, the United States, the Netherlands, Ireland, and the United Kingdom, who specialize in determining whether climate change made a specific extreme weather event more likely or more intense, published a rapid analysis of the June heat wave and reached a conclusion its own scientists described using almost no hedging language at all. Their study found that a heat wave with the same characteristics occurring in the climate of 1976 would have been approximately 3.5 degrees Celsius cooler, and that comparable June heat would have been virtually impossible without human-caused climate change. The researchers went further, estimating that the extreme nighttime temperatures observed during the event are now more than 100 times more likely than they were in 2003, the year of Europe's previous worst heat disaster. Their analysis also found that 45% of the 850 European cities they studied across 30 countries either broke or were on pace to break their all-time records for combined heat and humidity stress, a measurement called wet bulb globe temperature that accounts for how effectively the human body can actually cool itself, not just how hot the air reads on a thermometer. Separately, World Meteorological Organization officials have been blunt about what this means for the continent specifically. Tedros described Europe as the fastest warming continent on Earth, heating at roughly twice the global average, and said plainly that the phenomenon of the so-called once-in-a-generation heat wave is now occurring nearly every year. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, speaking during the same stretch of extreme heat, told a climate summit in London that humanity has just lived through the 11 hottest years ever recorded, and warned that the El Niño pattern currently developing in the Pacific is not just knocking on the door of the global climate system, it risks blowing the house down. That warning about El Niño is directly relevant to why scientists are telling people the worst heat is still ahead. So let me explain the mechanism plainly, because once you understand it, the forecast stops feeling abstract. A tropical Pacific El Niño event does not stay contained to the Pacific. It reshapes atmospheric circulation patterns across the entire planet. And one of its most consistent downstream effects is a tendency to strengthen and prolong exactly the kind of blocking high-pressure systems that have been sitting over Europe since May. Forecasters at multiple agencies, including AccuWeather and the Weather Company, released their July outlook explicitly warning that the entire European continent should expect above-average temperatures for the month, with widespread below-average precipitation compounding the risk. And there is a detail in that outlook that most people do not know, and that matters enormously for what comes next. Europe's hottest temperatures, on average, in a typical year, do not even arrive until July or August, well after the summer solstice, because the ocean waters surrounding the continent absorb heat slowly and take time to fully warm. That means the record-shattering heat that killed thousands of people in May and June happened before the season was even supposed to peak. Meteorologists have been explicit that this year, Europe essentially experienced July and August level heat in May and June, which means the actual climatological peak of the summer, the weeks still ahead of us, are stacking on top of a baseline that was already far hotter than anything the historical record anticipated. The immediate forecast bears that warning out precisely. A second major heat dome began building over Western Europe around July the 7th through 10th, and multiple forecasting centers, including the European Center for Medium-Range Weather Forecasts, identified the same dangerous structure behind it, another omega block, with confidence that it could stall over the continent for 6 to 9 days rather than passing through quickly. Meteorologists tracking the pattern have flagged Sunday, July 12th and Monday, July 13th specifically as the likely peak of this second wave. And unlike the June event, this one is not confined to the areas that suffered the worst the first time. Spain and Portugal, particularly inland Andalusia, are forecast to see temperatures climbing to between 44 and 46 degrees Celsius, threatening to break the July records the region has held for decades. Southwestern France is again positioned to become the center of the dome, with forecasts calling for 43 to 45 degrees Celsius, and some model guidance has flagged the potential for isolated readings near 45 degrees Celsius in parts of France more broadly, a number that in Fahrenheit sits at 113 degrees, hot enough to soften asphalt, buckle rail lines, and put outdoor workers at risk of life, threatening heat illness within minutes of direct sun exposure. Germany and the Benelux countries are forecast to see inland temperatures of 38 to 41 degrees Celsius, worsened further by the urban heat island effect in cities like Amsterdam, Brussels, and Frankfurt. Southern England, including London, is forecast to reach 34 to 37 degrees Celsius, well above what is seasonally normal even during a warm British summer. I also want to talk specifically about the regions that have so far been spared the worst of this, because that is changing, and scientists tracking the pattern say it is changing quickly. The Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania have been some of the more fortunate parts of the continent through both waves so far. Estonia's weather service issued only a yellow level alert in late June, mostly for scattered thunderstorms rather than sustained extreme heat, and temperatures across the region have generally stayed in the low to mid-20s Celsius, manageable by comparison to what France and Spain have endured. That relative shelter is not expected to hold. As the second heat dome expands northward and eastward through the coming week, forecasters expect the warmth that has been dominant over Western Europe to reach the Baltic states with real force, pushing temperatures that were sitting comfortably in the low 20s up into territory that will feel genuinely unusual for the region. Belarus and Ukraine have also seen some protection from scattered shower activity passing through, but meteorologists say that buffer is eroding as the high-pressure system strengthens and pushes further east. Poland, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Hungary, all of which broke temperature records during the June event, are forecast to see renewed warming through the weekend and into next week as the dome consolidates over Central Europe. This matters because these are not regions built for this kind of heat. Housing stock across northern and eastern Europe has traditionally been designed to retain warmth through long, cold winters, not to shed it during extended summer extremes and air conditioning. Penetration in these countries is even lower than the roughly 20% European average. When a heat dome that has already proven lethal in Western Europe expands into regions with less infrastructure to cope with it, scientists warn that the health impact can be disproportionate to the raw temperature numbers alone. It is also worth explaining why the thunderstorms so many people are hoping for will not actually solve the underlying problem, because this is one of the most common questions meteorologists have been fielding throughout the summer. There are places over the coming days where scattered storms are genuinely possible. Switzerland and Austria could see some activity moving in from the Alps. Northern Italy, Slovenia, and Croatia may catch isolated storms as well, and Serbia, Bosnia, Bulgaria, North Macedonia, and Romania are all sitting in a zone with some chance of hit or miss thunderstorm development. But these are convective pop-up storms, forming suddenly in unstable, superheated air, producing a brief and sometimes locally intense downpour with hail and gusty wind, and then dissipating within 20 to 30 minutes. They are not the broad, sustained, ground-soaking rain systems capable of actually breaking a heat dome or meaningfully replenishing depleted soil moisture. For the vast majority of France, all of Spain and Portugal, the UK and Ireland, the Netherlands, Belgium, Germany, Denmark, and most of Poland, the 7-day precipitation outlook shows essentially no meaningful rainfall at all. If you are waiting for a storm to bring relief, the honest answer from the people tracking this pattern professionally is that no such system is currently in any credible forecast for the areas that need it most. Beyond the immediate week, the picture scientists are watching does not offer much reassurance either. Even when this second heat dome eventually does weaken or shift, meteorologists are already flagging medium-range signals suggesting the possibility of another significant amplification of the heat pattern in the late July to early August. Europe's temperatures climatologically tend to peak in an ordinary year regardless of any additional heat dome activity, and even a temporary break in the pattern will not undo what 3 consecutive extreme heat events in a single summer have already done to the landscape. The wildfire scars left behind across Spain, Portugal, and southern France will leave those areas vulnerable to erosion and flash flooding once autumn rainfall eventually returns, since scorched ground sheds water rather than absorbing it. The agricultural losses from weeks of heat, stress, and drought are still being tallied by farming associations across the affected countries, and early assessments suggest they will be significant, with reduced yields expected for grain, fruit, and vegetable crops across large parts of Western and Southern Europe. Hospitals and emergency services that have already been stretched thin, responding to 2 consecutive mass casualty heat events, are bracing to manage the health consequences of this summer for months, not days, after the temperatures themselves finally come down. A heat dome lifting does not instantly reverse what weeks of extreme sustained heat have already done to the land, the water supply, or the people who lived through it. There is a specific reason meteorologists say this second wave carries even more risk than the one that just killed thousands of people. And it has nothing to do with the peak daytime temperature itself. It has to do with what 3 weeks of relentless heat did to the ground beneath everyone's feet. The June heat wave left soil moisture across large parts of Western Europe severely depleted. Under normal conditions, moisture evaporating from wet soil actually helps cool the surface air slightly, acting as a natural buffer against extreme heat. That buffer is now gone across huge stretches of France, Spain, and Portugal. With the ground already dry, the second heat dome is expected to heat the surface even faster than the first one did, because there is far less moisture left to absorb and dissipate the incoming energy. Scientists refer to the most extreme version of this feedback loop as a heatwave flash drought, sometimes called the hairdryer effect, where the combination of extreme heat, extremely dry air, and sustained wind accelerates evapotranspiration so rapidly that vegetation can lose its leaves and die within days. Wildfire risk spikes into the extreme to very extreme category almost overnight, and rivers and reservoirs that were already running low drop even further. Spain is already confronting serious drought and water stress as reservoir levels fall under increasing pressure, and France's energy regulators have raised concerns about reduced output from nuclear power plants that rely on the Rhone and Garonne rivers for cooling water, a constraint that could tighten electricity supply and push prices higher at exactly the moment demand for air conditioning is at its highest. I also want to address the nights directly, because this is the detail that separates a heat wave that is merely uncomfortable from one that becomes a genuine mass casualty event. And it is the detail scientists keep returning to when they explain why this year has been so much deadlier than a typical hot summer. Under normal conditions, after the sun goes down, the ground releases the heat it absorbed during the day and temperatures drop significantly overnight, giving the human body a window to recover before the next day's heat arrives. What has been happening across Europe this summer is that elevated moisture in the air, combined with the sheer persistence of the heat dome, is preventing that overnight drop from happening properly. In the eastern German town of Kubschutz, overnight temperatures during the June event never fell below 29.4 degrees Celsius, the warmest night recorded in that region since records began nearly 150 years ago. Researchers at World Weather Attribution specifically flagged nighttime temperatures as 100 times more likely under today's climate than they were in 2003, precisely because those tropical nights deny the body its only real opportunity to cool down across a 24-hour cycle. For elderly people, for people with heart or lung conditions, for infants and pregnant women, that lack of overnight recovery is very often what turns a hot week into a fatal one. And it is exactly what happened across Belgium, France, and Spain during the first wave, and it is exactly the mechanism scientists say will drive the death toll higher during the second. There's also the wildfire dimension, and it deserves its own explanation because it has already turned deadly this month, separate from the heat itself. On July 9th, a wildfire broke out in the southeastern Almeria province of Spain, killing at least 12 people and injuring at least 8 more, with 23. Additional people reported missing as firefighting crews worked to contain it. Major wildfires are currently burning simultaneously from Portugal through Spain and into southern France, with smoke plumes large enough to be visible from satellites in orbit. Fire danger has been elevated to red alert status across parts of Germany, the Czech Republic, and Poland as well, driven by the same combination of extreme heat, critically low humidity, and erratic wind that scientists point to as the classic signature of an accelerating fire environment. National weather services across Central Europe have warned that even a single spark under these conditions, a discarded cigarette, an overheated vehicle, a spark from machinery, can develop into an uncontrollable blaze within hours, given how completely the vegetation across the region has dried out. So when scientists say the worst heat is still ahead, this is specifically what they mean, laid out plainly rather than left vague. They mean a second omega block is already forming, capable of stalling over the continent for the better part of a week or longer. They mean it is arriving on top of soil, rivers, and reservoirs that are already critically depleted from the first event, which will accelerate how fast. Temperatures climb rather than buffering them. They mean nighttime temperatures are unlikely to offer meaningful recovery across the same regions that lost thousands of people during the first wave. They mean wildfire risk across Iberia, southern France, and parts of Central Europe is already at an extreme level before the second heat dome has even reached its peak. And they mean that Europe, as a continent warming at roughly twice the global average, has not yet reached the point in the calendar where its temperatures are typically expected to peak in an ordinary year, which means whatever July and August would have looked like anyway is now stacking directly on top of a summer that has already produced the most severe heat wave ever documented on the continent, according to the very scientists whose job it is to make that determination carefully and conservatively. If you are in any of the regions I have described, France, Spain, Portugal, Germany, the Benelux countries, southern England, or anywhere across Central Europe currently under a heat health warning, the guidance from public health agencies has not changed, and it will not change, no matter how many times this pattern repeats itself this summer. Avoid direct sun exposure between roughly 11 in the morning and 5 in the afternoon when the sun is strongest and temperatures are climbing toward their daily peak. Drink water consistently throughout the day rather than waiting until you feel thirsty, because thirst is already a late warning sign that dehydration has begun. Avoid alcohol during the hottest hours, since it accelerates dehydration rather than relieving it. Keep curtains and shutters closed during the day to block incoming heat. and open windows to ventilate early in the morning and late in the evening when outdoor air is at its coolest. Check on elderly relatives and neighbors who live alone at least twice a day, since heat illness in older adults can progress quickly and without the obvious warning signs. Younger people typically experience. Never leave children, elderly people, or pets in a parked car, even for a few minutes, given how rapidly interior temperatures climb in direct sun. Avoid swimming in canals, rivers with strong currents, quarries, or any unsupervised body of water, since drowning deaths have already risen sharply this summer as people seek relief from the heat in unsafe conditions. And if your home does not have air conditioning, which remains the case for roughly 80% of households across Europe, find out where your local municipality has opened a cooling center, whether that is a library, a community center, or another public building, and use it rather than waiting out the heat alone. I know some of you watching this are already living through dangerous temperatures right now, and I know others are watching from areas that have not yet felt the full force of what is building over the next several days. I want to close with the same message I close every serious weather update with, because it remains the single most important thing I can tell you. This is not a normal summer. The scientists studying this event are not speculating when they say the worst is still ahead of us. They are describing a pattern that is already visible in the forecast models, already measurable in the depleted soil, and the drought-stricken rivers, and already confirmed in the excess mortality data from an event that is not even finished yet. Take the warnings from your local weather service seriously the moment they are issued, not after the heat has already arrived. Look out for the people around you who are most vulnerable. And please, stay hydrated. Stay out of the sun during the peak hours and stay cool wherever you can find it. I will be back with another update as soon as the models give me something new and significant to share, and I will keep tracking this pattern for as long as it continues to threaten the people living through it. Thank you for trusting me with your weather. Stay safe.